And we have a very, very interesting panel, I think, for this. I'm very honored to have all these people here. I just hope everybody fits just fine up there and nobody falls off the stage. But we have three people, and I'll frame it this way. I like it because I see a balance of what I would call IT people, and again, and OT people. And I may be wrong how I characterize some people, but you know, on the top are three people who are essentially CISOs of major companies. I mean, Rockwell Automation, well, you have Don Capelli with CISO of Rockwell, Andy Huth is Vice President of Cybersecurity for Kohler Corporation, Tammy Klotz is Information Security Director at Versum Materials. And then on the bottom, and we have Rob Cox, who's Manager of Operations Technology at Georgia Pacific, Chris DaCosta, who's Operations Technology Cybersecurity Manager for Air Products and Chemicals. You spun them off, didn't you? I just realized that. It's an inside comment, I guess. And Jim Labonte, who's Director of Global Technology and Engineering for Pfizer. So I don't know their perspectives. It's just I know they come from different backgrounds, probably, with different probably perspectives. And so I invited them all on a panel because I want to get all the views. It's definitely not something them versus us. It's just, I just want to get a variety of views, and I think we have that. So if you all would join us on the stage up here, all the panelists. I did my best to make room. I'm down here, so. Oh, I want to get my notes.
You get bonus points for sitting on the end.
Yeah, I'm not finding you for that.
Do we need to strap you in? I'm sure you're good.
Okay, I had mentioned to all of the panelists that I would give them a few minutes just to comment, you know, maybe a little about your background or your perspective on what I just talked about, you know, your role and maybe what you're doing in your company, just to frame it for the audience so everybody knows what you're doing in that area, okay? So we can start. Rob, we'll start with you because you're on that end. I saw you hiding. He was one of those ones. You're probably one of those kids in school that looked down whenever the teacher would ask questions.
Robert Cox, work with Georgia Pacific. As Sid mentioned, I'm the OT manager for our company. A little bit of background, I spent 10 years in the Navy as a communications and IT specialist, focusing on network security, a combination of Navy's unsecure network and secure network. Then transitioned into a pulp and paper company out of Fernandina Beach, Florida. I worked there for about 7 years or so as a network admin and an IT manager with responsibilities for both IT infrastructure and industrial controls infrastructure. And then I transitioned to GP, hired in at one of their large mills, primarily focused on OT, worked in the engineering team.
Can you speak more in the mic?
Can
everybody hear?
For the control engineer team. And then I transitioned into the role that I'm in now, where my team focuses on the governance responsibilities for Georgia Pacific. We're responsible for OT security standards and policies. We also provide architectural and systems integration design support for our facilities. And we also provide some endpoint protection, thank you, capabilities to support some of our systems.
Go ahead, please, Dawn.
Hi, I'm Dawn Capelli. I am VP of Global Security and Chief Information Security Officer at Rockwell Automation. We create industrial control equipment, and so we are embedded in most critical infrastructures out there. So we take security very seriously. I became CISO in 2016, and at that point, although I originally was a software engineer programming nuclear power plants for Westinghouse, so I had some OT background, my primary background was in IT security. So I came to Rockwell I became the CISO, and suddenly I inherited this thing called OT. And honestly, my first day at Rockwell, I had to say, what's that O stand for? I never heard of that before. So I quickly had to figure out, oh boy, I'm responsible for securing our IT, but also our OT. And I didn't even know what OT meant. So where to start? And so we started with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which how many people out there have heard of that? Okay, oh, good. Probably about a third. We used that for our IT security strategic plan, and then it worked. So I thought, well, let's try that for OT security. So we brought in our plant managers, our security engineers from our plants, our IT people, and our security staff, and we used it and we came up with a manufacturing security strategy. So that's how we did our OT security and IT security. So we started converging those in 2016. After NotPetya, we decided that we need to have even a more holistic cybersecurity strategy. Because after NotPetya, we all saw that it's not just about your own IT and OT, it's about the whole ecosystem. And so we expanded our strategy last year to encompass our networks, our customer networks, our connections to them, our product security, our supply chain. So it's much bigger than just IT and OT. That security ecosystem has become huge.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mandy Huth. I'm the VP of Cybersecurity for Kohler. I've been with Kohler just over 100 days now. Moved from Portland to Wisconsin just in time for the polar vortex. Really excited about that. So I'm really glad to be here in Orlando with you. So what I really walked into, similar to what you spoke about, was, my background is in security software. I've been with Belden, which is also a manufacturer. We do ICS equipment. There was a speaker earlier today that was building the Tofinos originally, and then I moved into a highly regulated space, also security or regulatory software. So I've spent a lot of time with very agile processes, but I've also been on the industrial side of the house and having to have availability really high. What I saw at Kohler was what many of you see, is we had two very different populations. But as Kohler, and some of you may know this, you think very much about kitchen and bath. We also have a power group and hospitality. So we have PCI challenges, we have supply chain challenges, and we have, it's not just traditional manufacturing as Kohler's moving into smart home. Right, so now we have IoT issues as well as your plant floor considerations and how to keep things up and running. So where I really stepped back, similar to what Don was saying, is we had to pick a framework, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but Kohler didn't have a framework on either side of the fence to really measure themselves against. And so with no standards, the plant's going and driving revenue and trying to cut costs and do their thing, and cybersecurity is doing their thing. So I think that the challenge really begins in design. So if you think about our life cycle, if you go way back there, my challenge to you is there a solution that doesn't really cost any real dollars? And I think that sits with people. And so many of you have heard about Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I think that that extends beyond just a singular team, but also cross-functionally. And the first dysfunction is absence of trust. And because we have two, I won't even call it a power struggle, just two people, two populations doing different things, there's no trust because we don't understand each other. And so that is one of my primary considerations as I move us forward, is how do I get to that? And so first is understanding, and then second is the second part of the pyramid is the fear of healthy conflict. And so now, instead of a power struggle, it's you're right, I'm right. People are afraid to engage in a dialogue that is really about the best result for your business. So I really have I'm trying to get people to cross-educate, and really get in a heated conversation. It's okay, right? And so getting those teams together to start having those conversations really matter. And if we can get that understanding early in the process, it's much cheaper to design it than to retrofit it. So it's not a yes, no. And when you do that, it becomes a joint decision and a shared responsibility. So for me, from security perspective, as we talk about this, I'll talk really from a people perspective, because I think that's where I'm not asking you to spend $1 million to retrofit something that's already in place that exists. I'm not asking you to go out and build a new technology. We have to get our people right first.
So I'm Jim Labonte. I started in a small company called Kodak, Eastman Kodak, and I actually ran Kodak Park's IT/OT environment for a couple years before I decided to move on to another company called Rockwell Automation. So I actually spent some time there, about 6 years or so, and good learnings. I got to see what I'm in now, so I'm working for Pfizer, and my stint in Rockwell enabled to be able to move into that environment fairly well. So now I'm in a very highly regulated environment, and that poses some additional pressures on how you handle cybersecurity and its impact. But really, what drives me is I'm leading up a very large program right now across Pfizer to all our manufacturing plants, and that requires working with engineering. I'm a chemical engineer by learning, so I do use that technology word, sorry, a little bit. A little bit of technology doesn't hurt if used properly. It's tools, really. It's smart tools that take the work away from the people or enable the people in the factory in Florida to be smart, to use the information. And big one is obviously you can only protect what you know is out there. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know what you really have, it's a little difficult to figure out what you need to do. So if you have automated tools that really help you tell you what you got, you'll be in a much better place. That's probably a prerequisite is that kind of a tool to really help you if you're in a big corporation. So Pfizer today is not too small. It's about 250 billion in market cap, and the plants are fairly large. One factoid that most people don't realize is the majority of hospital supplies in the United States is Pfizer. And so that poses another challenge on the globe. What would happen if Pfizer was impacted by a cybersecurity risk? What happens to our hospitals if they don't get supply? So the financial risk is grave. It would definitely be over $1 billion if we had a similar, issue with NotPetya that happened to Merck. But what would happen to the people that are out there that trust in a company that has to supply our products? So the risk to the supply chain trumps any financial risk, and it's my imperative to ensure that our plant sites are well protected from this kind of a risk.
I'm gonna try this instead.
Yeah, good idea.
Hi everyone, I'm Tammy Klotz. I work for Versum Materials, which, as you heard earlier, we were a spin-off company from Air Products and Chemicals. We took the and chemicals part and became Versum, and another part of that business actually spun off into Evonik as well. And I know there's some folks here participating in the forum this week from Evonik as well. So I have the responsibility and accountability for the entire cyber program at Versum Materials. Versum is a 2,800 employee-based global organization that is a manufacturer of chemicals for the semiconductor industry. So we have 3 major elements to our program, which include our industrial control system, our OT cybersecurity, our IT security tools and processes, as well as our information security. So that's all rolled up into our comprehensive program. Prior to the role in Versum, I spent 24 years in a variety of IT roles within the Air Products organization. So I'm definitely from the IT side, not the OT side, but actually had done a lot of work actually with Chris before we spun off, because my most recent role prior to moving on to Versum was actually in the internal audit space. And that's where I first started to do some cyber work. And that actually is what positioned me well for the role that I'm in today. And we did a lot of work together as part of Chris's program and Bill's program to actually stand up our systems. And you'll actually, I'll do a plug for tomorrow at 2. We actually have a case study that will talk you through what we did to successfully spin off and stand up the OT cybersecurity program at Versum.
Thank you. So my name is Chris DaCosta, and I'm with Air Products and Chemicals. For those of you who haven't heard of us, we're an industrial gas supplier, mostly to other chemical manufacturers, food and beverage, pharmaceuticals. Most of you are our customers, and if you're not our customers, you're customers of our competitors, which is not good.
Leave.
Right, no more information. But anyway, my background is mostly in process controls. I have been 25 years doing process control, advanced controls, installing DCS systems, managing control platforms. And about 6 or so years ago, I was asked to take on the role of OT cybersecurity manager and get a program going to address the issues in our sites. I was very fortunate at the time to have an IT team who were, I'd say that they were anxious to learn, which is a good prerequisite. My CISO is actually sitting here today, and one of the things going in was that in IT, they would say, they'd be talking about the plant down, and I came to realize what they were talking about was the network was down and not the plant, because they always got a reaction out of me when they said plant down, and most OT folks. But our IT folks are very anxious to learn, and what I did was I grabbed my now CISO and took him around to all our plant sites, not all, but a number of them, and basically try to introduce him to the concept of what a DCS is, and we start speaking the language, and both of us became not just best of friends, but also within the technology. He was able to drive that technology within IT. I'm like the single point of contact for working with our operations team. It had to be really a combined effort. Once we figured out that at Air Products, we have a lot of smart people, and everybody has an idea of how to solve this issue of plant cyber. But we realized that we had too many answers, and we decided to take a step back and go to the standard-based approach that there were other folks, consultants in the industry who had a lot of experience. So we decided we're going to go back and lean on them and lean on the standards and base our programs on that. And we learned quite a lot in that whole effort. One of the things we learned was that you really need to have a comprehensive approach. It's not just about putting technology out in the sites. You really need to address all the people, the processes, as well as having the technology. And then it doesn't end when you have that system in place, when you've changed the culture. You actually need to have a continuing program to sustain that. And that's where we are. We just completed a 5-year program that basically retrofitted our cybersecurity architecture into 600 plus plants worldwide. And from that, now we're into the next phase, which is really, how do we sustain, now that we have all this data, how do we manage the incidents if they do happen? How do we manage the monitor, the SIM, the alerts that come in? How do we address threat intelligence? What kind of actions do we take, and how do we continue to organize and evolve our strategies with the threats that continue to change? And one of those is WannaCry, which 5 years ago, that wasn't an issue. Obviously, two years ago, it became a significant issue, and we literally had to change our architecture to match that. So it's just an ongoing thing. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. It was very, very good. Oh, and Dawn's also from Pittsburgh, right?
Yes, but I hate to admit that since
No,
the
no, no, no,
Patriots
I-
just won last night.
Well, no, you have we're together on that, so. Okay, I have a lot of questions I want to ask. Again, doing my research while I'm here, but let me see if there's any questions from the floor about anything, about what they're doing, or. You don't see it? I can't see with that light. I'm sorry. Oh, I know, I've been doing this all day long. Okay, let me just ask one, let's just start off the discussion here by just saying, you know, you've heard my comments about the converge programs. But what do you see? I mean, I think you all support that. Maybe if you don't, say that. But if you do support it, I mean, what do you see as the benefits of a converge program? What are the main ones that are of interest to you? I mean, there's all kinds, I'm sure, but which ones really are the ones that you are focusing on or using to justify it or driving for? And also, are there any negatives about doing it? So it's two questions, but Phil, go right ahead.
I'll start, if that's okay.
That's good Pittsburgher for you.
I think the benefit to creating a holistic strategy that encompasses your whole company is if you can do it, if you can get everyone to work together, you have people like in our company, we have IT security, OT security, our product security office, our connected services team that works with customers. We all created this strategy together, and we used standards to do it. And so when we come out of that, we not only created this, here's everything we need to do. Of course, you end up with this huge laundry list. But then we had to take a risk-based approach to saying, okay, so what are the priorities of all of these things? Because there's only so many people and so much money to go around. So for us to go to our leadership, including our board of directors, with this list that we said, look, this isn't just Dawn's opinion. This is created by our security leaders and our security practitioners across the entire company. And this is what we decided are our high priority security initiatives. How can they say no? It was kind of like, well, of course, how can we object to that? So I think that's a big benefit. It's very easy to get leadership buy-in when you can say, this is not just one piece of the company and then the other ones are gonna come with their lists. This is all of us, and this is what we all agreed on.
So one comprehensive strategy for the whole company. Okay.
I absolutely agree with Don. And as I've moved to Kohler, I think what I'm seeing is getting that standard framework and a strategy around that provides a common vocabulary. It doesn't matter which side you're on. Implementation may look different, but the guideline and the standard that you're measuring yourself against is consistent. And when you have that consistency, even when you go to the board, you say, here are the words I'm going to use. Here are the top 20 controls, and by priority or criticality, this is how we're going to address those. So you create, in that common vernacular, you create efficiency, right? Because everybody's talking the same language. The second piece of that I really see is when you start talking consistently about your risks, I really like the idea of a converged IT/OT SOC. And that doesn't mean you don't have people with subject matter expertise. It's the same even if you were just IT. You have network engineers that are really good and you have system administrators, but that doesn't mean a system administrator can't help with network. And so for me, when you create that consistent language, you also create redundancy, because you can start sharing across IT and OT, and that might not be their primary expertise, but they can start helping and learning, okay, I understand consistently what our risks are. How does it apply to IT? How do I help in OT? And that helps your company as well.
Yeah, so GP is still a little bit immature in the OT space, and I want to give kudos to Carl. Wave, Carl. Carl gets the credit for kind of birthing OT convergence in our company. And as a controls engineer, he recognized many years ago that as projects and systems were getting, deployed and investments were getting made, that modern day control systems needed some level of standardization, right? So the very first thing that he did years ago was he stood up a working group that consisted of some of our security information professionals, some of our IT technology professionals, and most importantly, our control engineers. And that team worked together, and this is to both of your points, to identify what those standards and those security requirements meant for the company based on our risk profile and what our tolerance is. It's going to be different for everybody, right? Every company's different. What you guys do and what we do is going to be different. Therefore, your tolerance are different, and how you address them are going to be different. But getting that alignment up front, getting the right people involved with the comparative advantage to identify those risks and define those standards to reduce that risk in your company is by far the most important thing to do. I think the other thing that it did, and I don't know if, Carl, you recognized this early on when you did that effort, but it did start that trust building model, right? It kind of broke away some of the walls and barriers that had always historically been between the engineer space and the IT space, and kind of almost forced the hand of the two groups working together as a team.
I think one of the advantages that we had as a company is that we had a very defined amount of time to get off of the air product system. So we had a very focused team and a common goal with a clear business driver that needed to be obtained. So we went into it eyes wide open with the site personnel who were assisting the OT team, the IT team, and with that we were able to put together a very strong team that worked towards getting us stood up on our own. And I'm trying not to talk about everything I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but that in itself, it helps with the language, it helps with the trust, it helps with establishing the standards that you're working towards, understanding what you have, where it is, who has access to it, et cetera. So that learning and that working together is invaluable in building and maximizing your people and the knowledge that they do have. And very much, we did not go into it with a we versus them attitude. We were all in it together, and we were working towards that common goal.
So I have one quick comment. A lot of people pick on the word or have probably a misperception of what convergence really means. So it's used pretty pervasively, but I like the word better integrated IT environment. Integration is, people and groups actually leveraging off each other's strengths and collaborating is the answer to this problem, cybersecurity. And it's also even the SOC. So when you get up into the SOCs, just an IT organization driving down is pretty ineffective to the OT environment unless it's populated with very OT experienced literate people. Because getting an alert from the factory floor that says you got X and Y going on, it's just data. Data without experience, and you can make meaningful inferences from what's truly happening on the factory floor. So if you got lots of plants around the globe, you need people that are very intelligent, can talk right to the floor and have an intelligent conversation within minutes versus days of trying to figure out what's really happening. So it's imperative to move fast and be able to have a quick conversation. So integrated is probably the key word I look to. And convergence tells me it's like blended all together like peanut butter. And yeah, it's all together and you can spread it, but it's pretty thin. So.
Does everybody else agree with that? I mean, is
Yeah.
that how you characterize your program, more of that?
I just have two quick points. So one is if you look at the cyber kill chain, most of the attacks that come in will come in through the enterprise. As such, from an OT perspective, any efforts that we can spend trying to prevent those attacks from coming into the enterprise is going to benefit the OT folks. So that's one key thing. The second issue is really most operations teams, they're extremely busy and very focused on delivering product to a customer or widgets or whatever you make, but they're very, very focused and trying to do it in a safe and reliable fashion. They get inundated with requests to do all kinds of other things. So one of the things that even in my role is to make sure that we're not having them do extra tasks, anything else that's going to take away from their primary responsibility. So to the extent that we can leverage our IT team to assist, to address some of the issues that around cyber that can be addressed, that's an advantage for us, a competitive advantage. I feel very confident and very proud that we've been able to achieve that in our space.
And the people in the OT group, the people in your OT group reflect, I mean, you're going to say, of course they reflect your opinion, but I mean. 100%. Yeah, right. No, I'm just saying, because I deal with a lot of OT people. Mm-hmm. And again, that thing, I don't know if I mentioned it. I mentioned it sometime today about, we don't want you coming in our plant. I mean, it was more that kind of, or keep out, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, for maybe not in a mean way, but there's just have high concerns that you don't know what you're doing and you may come in and disrupt something. I think they're also, I've also seen
that's a very good point.
Things. What?
It's a very good point. I mean, OT folks, I think they're the same everywhere. I mean, they don't trust IT people. And actually.
No, that was my experience.
So part of my role is to be the go-between. Actually, I knew I was making progress when they start calling me an IT person. Okay, but
I want to challenge that
Please.
A little bit though. For
Please.
all of you that are OT, right? We have similar foundations. We've just applied them differently. So if OT isn't trusting IT, they're also not educating them, right? And how can we help if we're not cross-functionally collaborating and teaching each other? You should be concerned about this, or if you touch this, and that's going to bring this down for a minimum of 15 minutes, or a reboot has to be in this order, or you're bringing the line down, right? So those types of things, I think, can easily be overcome with cross-functional education. And, again, you don't have to be an OT expert, but you start to build some credibility that you can take those non-prioritized tasks and do those and be helpful.
I've seen that what you just said makes a lot of sense. But I've also seen sometimes OT people will say, that's fine. Why don't you come and work in my group? Most OT groups are saying, they know they need IT help. Nobody's against help, but they want the help under their control. So they'll say, or you might say, let me hire some more IT people, and your boss says, no, you can't hire anybody. You say, well, all right, why don't we bring somebody in? But we got to bring him in here so he works in here in the plant and gets to know it. And I think there's a lot to that, and build those relationships with operations and stuff like that.
What I will say, okay, your point taken. The first time you walk into the plant, you're going to get what I said before, okay? Part of my role, because I'd built up 25, 28 years of experience in the OT environment. So I came in there with credibility. So I brought in my teams with me, and we're able to start to make progress and demonstrate that we could make these changes, do these upgrades, add value without interrupting their operation. And every time we'd go into a new plant, what they wanted to know is, so are we the first? We got we got 100 other guys. You're like middle of the list, man. And so from that credibility, then you can start having the secondary conversations, and you can get past this issue of trust and all that. And I think we've been successful, at least in my environment.
This is where I found the workshops we ran using the NIST cybersecurity framework as our guide was really helpful, because we're looking at identify. Okay, can you identify all of the assets that you have in your plant? And IT would talk about what we do on our networks, and then OT would talk about what they do, and then they'd put their heads together and say, well, what could we do together? How can we get this gap closed that we both have? And then the same with protect. and detect. Detect, you get into, well, how can you detect network anomalies? And you talk about what tooling you have on the IT side, what tooling you have on the OT side, what processes do you have on both sides? How can we synergistically work together, integrated, as opposed to maybe converged? But it was really helpful to walk through. And the other thing about doing it that way, what worries me in security is there are always these shiny new technologies out there that people want to jump at. Hey, I just saw this neat thing at the ARC Summit. We have to go and buy this. But if you take a structured approach and you use a framework like NIST, you now know you have looked at everything. You haven't missed anything. You've prioritized. Now you can address the top of your list. So when I have a vendor call, I'll just say, oh, sorry, you're not at the top of my list, maybe next year. And I don't even talk to them. So I think it's useful for that reason as well.
Sid, I have a couple from the floor.
Oh, sure, okay.
Yeah, my name is Pat Differ. I work with Mission Secure. And my question for all of you is that one thing I've learned about NIST controls is you can measure just about anything. And you can create a lot of different types of measurement processes. So one of the questions I have is, how did you arrive at developing subcategories that were fair to the overall funding argument? Because I think that's what you're getting to when you do a NIST exercise. You're trying to develop some kind of output, and I'll just use one like detection and monitoring. What was the driving mechanisms behind your decision process on whether you would spend money on the enterprise or, in other words, IT or OT? I would imagine that's a tough thing to do, but just like to get your ideas on that.
So I mentioned the security standard that we developed in Georgia Pacific. The next thing we did was we developed policies specific to OT, right? Then the very next thing we did is what you just said, is we developed some metrics behind some of the components, right? And we developed a mental framework about various disciplines within cybersecurity as it related to industrial controls and automation. Anything from patching to antivirus to firewall to network segmentation, and we took all the components that we had identified and we built ourselves a metric scorecard, right? And then we kind of figured out, well, what does that look like? What does good look like? Where do we want to be? You know, what does it look like compared to our risk tolerance, et cetera? And then we started to develop calculations of what each of those components would mean to us as a business, right? So to give you an example, people keep talking about patching and how some will do it, some will don't, and blah, blah, blah. Eventually, you're going to have to patch a system. I'm sorry, there's just no way around it. It's not an Apple device. It's not going to patch itself. You know, you're going to have a reboot, right? So our policy states that industrial control systems will be patched at least once a year, right? Plain and simple. Totally different than the IT policy, but in tolerance with the OT and operations world, right? So now we've got some metrics that we can live off of. We could calculate it. We could identify KPIs, what looks good, what looks bad. And now we can deliver some prioritization efforts, right? Where do I need to spend some money? Where do I need to focus on, right? We did the same thing for backups. We did it for firewalls. We did it across, you know, the discipline board of anything that is related to cyber and the OT space. And once we were able to put some numbers on it, engineers love numbers, right? Management loves numbers. It certainly made the decision on investment so much easier. It also helps you identify all those gaps and where you need to really focus on. And we also kind of took a tiered approach. We knew early on, we can't handle all these gaps instantly. There's no way possible, right? So we tiered them. We did a foundation, an intermediate, advanced, and sustaining, right? And we focused our efforts early on foundational. And we started to wean ourselves into the intermediate and so forth. And because of that, our program has developed to the point where, knock on wood, for the most part, our OT space has been relatively safe. Where we still have issues is in parts of our business that are not as far along as mature as the other lines of business. And we clearly see that they're still getting hit with the viruses. They're still seeing the downtime, where the business over here that made those investments, they're protected. They're not having downtimes. They're not taking outages because of some stupid malware.
So one other thing that I'd like to add to, I'm assuming Georgia Pacific has a plethora of resources and Kohler does not. We are a very lean security organization. So I want to give you just a little tip. Don mentioned NIST, and they have a wealth, they have 17 control families, for like their moderate security, there's 325 controls underneath of that. But, Kohler decided to go with the CIS critical security controls. So if you're looking, and all of these kind of map to each other, whether it's ISO 27001, whether it's PCI requirements, CIS critical security controls, NIST, pick. It really, there's so much crossover in the controls. The reason we chose CIS critical security controls was twofold. The first was because we're a lean organization and we didn't have blanket understanding, having a picture of 20, and there's about 125 underneath of those. But, that's an easy conversation to have with the business. It's very approachable. And CIS has taken the time with a consortium of independent people to figure out what the highest priorities should be. So if you don't have the resources to say, this makes sense for my business and I'm going to build these out, they've given you should do inventory first. If you don't see it, if you don't know you have to protect it, you can't protect it. So you move down that list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are your basic controls. The other thing that CIS has done that I really liked, because metrics are hard, is for each of those controls, all 125 of them, they have a metric. It's a Six Sigma metric, and it says, this is how you can measure the success of that. So I don't have to go define my own measures. I may need to tweak them, and I may not use every metric, but I can go through then with my team and say, we're going to take these 3 metrics and start there. And then once we've done those well, we can pick another one. And so it can be very iterative. It can be very easy entry for those of you that may not have a large security team to go at.
I'll just give a quick comment. Have you heard of a cyber PHA? Okay. And the reason is there is a difference between compliance and risk management. And a lot of folks, they like to check the boxes, compliant, compliant, compliant. And they apply the same methodology regardless of the consequence, regardless of the risk. To me, you are not spending your dollars appropriately. You have to understand the consequence, and that's what the Cyber PHA gives you. It allows you to understand, okay, well, what if this went wrong? What is the consequence of that? And then you will understand whether you have a gap in the safeguards that you have in place. That's how we have approached our architectures.
So one other point, tackling this problem is really having a definition within your company of really what is a secure plant? What does it look like? What are the main high-level requirements that really tell you, hey, if I hit this future state, this is what a secure plant will look like. And then coupled with that, if you know what you're trying to build towards, then you can build a reference architecture that all your plants will, sort of follow. So when you go in and have those conversations with, a plant site, it's like, hey, what are you trying to do here? Are you doing a piece? Or if you can show the picture of the full picture where you're trying to get to, maybe a couple of years out, it still helps people to understand and get their heads around what you're trying to accomplish and why. So, key points.
Can I,
One more from the floor.
before you do, I just
Okay.
want to just ask for clarification of something.
Into the microphone.
Oh, I thought you were pointing to somebody. No, I just wanted, a key thing was, I understood everything everybody said there and everything. But has the fact that you're trying to work with a integrated, balanced program facilitated the metrics? I mean, are you applying the same metrics or same categories? I mean, I know like Dawn, you use the NIST CSF model for everything. I don't know if that's true for all the others. Like when I heard people say like Cyber PHA doesn't seem to me to fit real well with the IT world. So it seemed like a different one. I may be wrong.
We're
Or does it?
actually not using the same one, so we use NIST CSF for our IT and OT security. For our product security, we use IEC 62443,
Okay.
because that's the standard. And then for our services security, it's ISO 27001. So we actually use 3 different ones.
Well, the root of my question though was just trying to see if that was a benefit. I mean, I've heard all the stuff and it sounds wonderful about, big issue is getting people to work together. Everybody kind of says, I understand it's a common problem. And one of the issues is getting trust on both sides that we can help each other. And then people are willing to do it. Like, if you work for Air Products, you don't have any extra time anyhow, right? You're willing to accept any help you can get, right? But you have to trust that person, right?
Yeah.
So, and this thing of working together has helped to build the trust and developing metrics together and stuff like that?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to common vernacular, and you have that list of metrics, but from an IT perspective, right, I might be looking to make sure that I have really strong backup and recovery plan and redundancy in my systems. But, from the plant side, the most important metric might be that I have 100% visibility onto every system on the floor so that I'll know when it's down, because availability, and then that continuous monitoring. So those metrics might be higher in my list, but we're pulling from the same list of metrics, even though we might not be leveraging the same metrics all the time for both organizations.
Okay. There was a question out here, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Byron Black with Rockwell Automation. I'm curious about the panelists who obviously have a wealth of experience and expertise in the field, and you're kind of leading the company that you represent as far as this part of the the infrastructure or technologies, let's call it, and people. Did you, when you went on this journey, so to speak, did you look for outside help, kind of consultancy, vendors? Or did you kind of say, hey, you know what, I kind of know this thing, I'm going to do it on my own?
We do a little bit of both. We've brought in third-party consultants to do industrial control security assessments. We just recently brought in a third party to do our first ever industrial control cyber audits. We actually also just brought in another consultant to review our OT governance model. And then over the past 6 years, we thought we knew what we were doing, so we did that also. So kind of a mixed bag, right? There's probably not a single recipe that works for everybody.
Yeah, we did a similar approach too. We've had several different third parties assist with tabletop exercises in the space, penetration testing, assessments, et cetera. So, we have a very lean organization as well. So we can't do it all. And the reliance on those third parties is required.
And I think the best way to approach that, I think of, and I actually talked to someone out in the hall about this. So for those of you who have read the book, Good to Great with Jim Collins, right, he talks about the hedgehog principle. And you need to really think about in your security organization, whichever one you are, what are your core capabilities? And if it's not the one thing you do well, it's okay to augment with people that do that well. I don't have a wealth of pen testers on my team, so having someone else pen test for me makes sense, right? So choosing those places where it makes sense to augment with someone that's stronger in that capability than you makes a lot of sense.
And I think the other benefit that you get from using the third parties, it's an external opinion, right? So it's not your own opinion talking about your resources who are doing something. You're getting that outside expertise and review of what you've done.
So example, in Pfizer, there's 3 full-time Pfizer employees on a team of 60. So
Oh, wow.
Your question is very profound. We're very lean, Mandy.
We got one from the floor here.
Okay. Marcellus Buchheit, Vibo Systems. This word convergence is a progress, so it is not something we end. My question is from your experience, how you see the future when this IT-OT convergence come to an end? Are we still have separated networks, smart connected or we have them united? What you are feeling? What's your experience about that?
Are you referring to, just to clarify for them, are you asking about technology, or are you asking about organization, or maybe all of them?
That's a good question. I mean, what technology doesn't matter, but the information exchange doesn't matter. Yeah, bring we stuff from the OT to the IT and vice versa, automatic system in the cloud or something, and how this will be implemented is a second thing. But just from the management, yeah, it's.
I think it's going to continue to evolve based upon, how the business changes, what your, how your business, develops new product offerings, et cetera. I mean, we've had some recent developments in the past couple of months where the focus of some of the cyber questions that we are getting now are from the outside, less from the inside, from a supply chain perspective, those types of things. So, the beauty has been that because of what we've done over the last 2 years, when we are now getting customer requests with regarding our certifications or what we've done, the teams are coming together and answering those questions collectively. So we're not answering it, we're answering it on behalf of the company, not from an IT perspective, not from an OT perspective. And that has allowed us to, continue to build those relationships. So I think it's just going to continue to evolve. I don't know that we will, dissolve. It will continue to evolve and continue to converge and continue to integrate more than anything else.
I guess my add to that would be, I think what's important is to put a process in place. I think you have to accept that this whole integration is going to continue there forever. And the issue is that your OT resources you're going to water them down if you expect them to have all these additional skills. So it's okay for them not to. What's important that you have a process in place, though, such that when an issue comes up or a new technology, new innovation, that they understand what the process is that they have to go through to get this technology approved for implementation and done in a secure fashion.
So let me pose a question back to you all. If you get 1.5 petabytes of information per day coming off your SIM, how do you handle that? Do you address all those alerts coming back into the factory? So what's your answer? So how do you get to your subset?
Just take the top 10.
First
There
out.
you go. It's a fight.
Let's start with someplace. Yeah. A question over here.
My name is Patrick Nelson, and I'm with Tata Consultancy Services. The question I have is that as I look at each of you on the stage, there are some of you that represent the leadership for organizations. The topic that you're driving is IT-OT convergence. And one of the things that I haven't heard anybody speak about is that usually what happens is you go into the market and you hire based on a specific expertise into a specific career path. If IT and OT are merging together, are you beginning to develop your career paths and your education for your younger people to where they come into a blended career path where they're getting college courses and then getting training once they come into your companies in both career paths, so that at some point you just got one career path and a person comes in and they can specialize if they choose to, but there are some things that they have to, some courses they would have to go to and experiences that would be set up for them assignment to assignment to where they get both. Because it sounds like if it's truly going to converge, you got to deal with the people first. And if your organizations are small, second point, and it would seem that it would make a lot of sense to leverage partners to help you in those gaps, all right? And as you build your organization of both, those partners can help you to maintain until you get to the staffing levels you want with both capabilities in one person.
So it's funny, Jim and I were talking about this right before this session. One of my career goals before I retire is I want to have a well-defined security career path in Rockwell Automation. So we just started on it. Because now we have all the security teams working together, we now have all of the security leaders working together, looking at what can we do with our people to give them a career path so that they can move around and move up within the company and not leave. Because one thing that we all have to face is the shortage of security people today. And so the last thing we want to do is lose people because they feel like, well, I've gone as far as I can in Rockwell. I don't know anything about OT. I guess it's time to leave. Or on the OT side.
That's what happens. Right?
So that's why you left.
That's exactly what happens.
So we're actively working on that. We just started on the first step, and we want to do exactly what you said, where we define the different jobs and we define beginner, intermediate, and advanced. What skills do you need to enter each of those positions, and what skills can you develop after you're in the position? So we'll be able to tell people, if you're here and you want to move here, here's what you need to learn. And then we'll provide the mechanism that they can actually do on-the-job training. So why not send one of our IT engineers out with an OT security team to a customer site to learn on the job so that they're developing a new skill. So you hit my hot button there.
So the other thing I would say is, in addition to a shortage of resources that are up and coming, we also have a workforce that in the next 10 to 20 years is going to age out, right? And there's a lot of historical knowledge. So really getting those career paths defined is really critical. The other thing that I would recommend, though, is I hire for two things, and it's not expertise. It's aptitude and motivation, because I can't teach those two things. I can give you a career path and I can educate you to learn those things. And so I have taken the premise, I will hire a junior person because it's gonna take me 6 to 9 months to poach somebody from Dawn, right? Because that's what we're all doing, right? Because we have a limited pool of resources. Or I could bring somebody in and start to educate them in those 6 to 9 months because they're really eager, strong people that want to learn. So those would be two other ways that I would just challenge you to consider.
Very good question, by the way. And if any of you takes anything away from that question, take away that you've got to do something, right? So give you an example. At many of our large facilities within Georgia Pacific, we have dedicated IT people. And by far, the hardest thing that we've been working on to try to figure out is how can Georgia Pacific best support OT, right? Where we've gotten ourselves into is a scenario where our engineers are having to do mundane cyber tasks. And we don't want that. It's not their comparative advantage. We lose money when engineers are having to patch a box. We'd rather use some IT resources that have that comparative advantage and let them do some of that work. So we're trying to translate some of our, what used to be historical IT people that only focused on business systems, and train them to also be able to support some things in OT. Baby steps, of course, right? So we're doing some cross-training in-house. One of the other things that we've started to do is we quit hiring systems analysts and systems technicians. We're now hiring manufacturing technicians, where the focus is not just come in and you're the guy that fixes the printer and fixes the desktop. You're the guy that works inside the fence line of a manufacturing facility that can support technology top to bottom. We're changing that mental model, we're changing the expectation as they come in the door, as we get new bodies and new blood in, right? And then, of course, leveraging third-party training capabilities where we see fit. We've gotten to the point now where we're also sending IT people to Honeywell Experion training, to Delta V's training at Emerson. They're going to Rockwell classes. If you had said that 5 years ago, I probably would have got punched in the head by an engineer, right? Because we just didn't think that way. You have to change your mental model. You got to think about what could be, what's going to add some value to your organization. The resources are the number one thing.
Yeah, Chris, it's John from EPCOR. You'd said something about watering down somebody's job. Is that correct? Can you expand on that? Are you saying that you're watering down a process engineer by bothering them?
Jim or Chris?
No, Chris. Chris.
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Can you expand on that?
Can you tell me a little bit more about what I said? Watering down somebody's job.
Well, the line of
We have it
questioning
on
was
tape, so you-
such.
Replay.
Yeah, I think it's going to tail in onto some of the other topics that were just mentioned. Is you talked about watering down, and I assumed that it was you were saying you were watering down a process engineer's skill set by making them do cybersecurity, but we hear that Georgia Pacific is now actually looking at putting IT into a process control training with the DCS and that. Is that what you were talking about?
Our approach has been to train a set of folks in IT and actually focus that group on plant computer systems. Okay, so we actually have a group in IT. They're not traditional IT folks. Well, I mean, they're IT background, but they're trained specifically on plant computer systems. And it's specifically to address the issue that our controls individuals are interested in writing applications code in whatever languages that they programming, whichever DCS is, but they don't want to be quote unquote IT experts. They don't want to be experts in fixing hard drives and backing up systems. They don't want to do that work. They are interested in working on instruments. They're working on analyzers, on valves. They want to work on DCS systems. They don't want to do quote unquote traditional IT work.
This question over here.
Yes, Jeff Adams with Evonik, and I'm curious to know about change management and how you address that in the converged environment between the two entities.
Wow.
What's this change management thing you speak of?
Precisely.
Okay, I'll take that one since I work and live in the change management world, right? Big time. So in a regulated world, change management's
Well,
king.
you don't make any changes, right?
Well, there are changes that occur, but they're very controlled, regulated. So actually, having a very well architected, layered structure greatly, I'm going to say the word again, greatly improves the change management structure and the confusion actually that occurs, or the overlapping that occurs between the IT world and the OT. If you have a very well architected structure, the boundary line between those plant floor systems and the IT systems becomes clearer. So in the change management world at a plant, on the plant floor, that's very much following a local plant process, procedures, policies, and such. And then in our IT world, it's a global view, standardized across the whole globe. Doesn't matter where you are or what plant you're in, it's common. But having that boundary line really clearly defined is important, because then it's clear which change control process I'm following and how things are to be worked on. And I just been finding it's been extremely helpful to understand, have that real clear system boundary between the plant floor systems and the IT environment.
And a comment. That's a really good question. We actually had to add a category in our change management system called cybersecurity changes. Any change that would impact the risk, the cybersecurity architecture that would cause a risk to the plant, and that actually made a huge difference, because what it did was it identified a number of changes that were not being looked at in our system. So that's one of the ways we've addressed that.
You mean you evaluate changes
All
now with cybersecurity as one of the criteria?
Correct, correct.
It's not changing the cybersecurity, but the cybersecurity
Changes that could impact
of the
the
change.
To what granularity, Chris?
Again.
To what granularity? I mean, Microsoft 17043 patch, is that something you would enter into a change management process?
So
Much bigger.
actually, it does go down to that level. If we're doing a whole scale patch, because part of it is also, part of change management is also communications, right?
Sure.
And don't really want to go and make changes that could impact plant operation without informing the plant. Right. So patch would fall in that category, yes.
Another question over there. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Please. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Vladimir from Braskem. As some of you explained, I understood that this convergence or integration some of you are focused in cybersecurity things, but my question is if any of your companies have achieved the total integration between IT and OT, and if you achieve something that for us is very difficult at Braskem is to have the trust and the reliability between both teams. IT and OT, of course.
So to say we have all our plants fully integrated, all done, I guess I'll go find some more work, right? I'm done. But no, we're not done. We're not there yet. But I will say we have a good number of initial plants that have made a lot of strong progress. Both the tools, the people, the training, and we still have a little more road to go, probably another couple more years or so, to get it to a maturity level that is, I'll call it sustaining and maturing over time. So we're on that journey. This journey is, especially in the OT world, is one that, showed its ugly head a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. And now we all have to, that's the way we got to work now, right? That's what's out there. So we have to meet that challenge head on.
Yeah. I think one of the advantages, again, that we've had as a result of having to physically touch every facility, every manufacturing location that we had the opportunity to build the relationship, get face time with everybody. And today, we have a biweekly, ops meeting that we hold, that we talk about what the new demand is, what current issues are going on, et cetera. So, are we fully integrated? But I'm pretty proud of what we've accomplished in this space because we do have a comprehensive set of, standards that we're working towards. People are talking to each other. If there's a new construction going on and somebody on the OT side hears about it, they're like, oh, did you talk to IT already? Do they know about it? So we have that crosstalk happening between the two organizations so that the amount of surprises are actually minimal for us right now.
Yeah, and I would say our security teams now are integrated. I think it comes from the leadership on down. We just had a meeting this morning, a 2-hour meeting, where we're using a strategy deployment process to deploy our security strategy, because we found it's one thing to lay out this great security strategy. Now we have to go do it. How do you track all of that across the entire company? And so we are working together. So we're now at the point where IT and OT are working together on the security strategy. We're not perfect, it's not converged, but.
Another one? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm Gopi Balakrishnan from Tata Consultancy, as well as Patrick. My question is, do any of your companies incubate new technologies towards solving security issues? And what's the process or the discipline that you use to bring in those technology?
So I think it's cross-functional. Again, it's about being present. So I'll give you an example. Earlier in January, to get security really talking to where our products going, I went to the Consumer Electronics Show. And I didn't sit with my security team. I went with the product marketing team. And so we were looking at how they're incubating, what kind of technology are they thinking about leveraging to increase our place in market, so that I could start planning and having conversations with them about how we can secure those things. And then on the other side of that, we do have an innovation team that works with the engineering team. And when we start thinking about something, we talk to the engineering teams and say, how would this play out for for production and, you know, for user experience, not just from an IT perspective, but also from an OT perspective, depending on what the technology is. So we have both of those teams in place, and I really do think most of it is about creating those relationships so they know who to contact, get us engaged really early in the process so that we know what the other one's thinking about 2 years ahead of time, right? I mean, I'm already thinking about, oh, we're talking about technology that's going to be in your bathroom. How do I protect that from a privacy perspective? But also, all of a sudden, the manufacturing plant and the data they're capturing on a product is very different, and I have to start thinking about how I'm gonna secure that too. So it comes from both ways, and having those conversations really helps us.
So I have my, in the audience, I have my digital transformation lead here who's also works in the same group with me. And so he's plugged into all those conversations, and actually he draws me in whenever there's a cybersecurity issue that comes up, which is all the time.
We have a business development team at Rockwell Automation that's actively looking at what new products or technologies would make sense for us. And in addition, I was told I can't give a sales pitch, but I'm just saying.
No, you were asked. Go ahead.
We have a partnership with Clarity. For those of you that don't know Clarity, it's a very interesting OT technology that enables you to address the NIST cybersecurity framework: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, the whole spectrum.
So I would like to say that we could incubate some new technologies, but I don't know that we're quite there yet. We're challenged with 140 plus facilities across the USA, and of those 140, there's 12 different operation units. And Georgia Pacific's growth over the years has a lot of times been with acquisition. So when it comes to commonality of systems on the plant floor, you can imagine, right? We focus on a lot of piloting and experimenting right now. We've got pilots going on with Dragos, Nozomi, we're doing a Clarity one. I mean, pick your flavor of the day, and we're testing it. And I think the biggest thing is trying to find a technology that would fit across 12 different lines of operations, where we've got 19 different flavors of PLCs and 7 different DCSs, right? It's hard. It's very hard. If I could be king for a day and wave the magic wand, you know, we'd be in a whole different state. So,
Ben Bennett from Iderto. I'm not sure whether this is good news or bad news for you guys, but we were at Black Hat every year, and the DEF CON, we have ethical hack teams join the DEF CON, and sort of the word on the street is they're moving away from banking and media, and the term industrial IoT, that looks like an interesting place to monetize. So the question for the panel is more, what are the sorts of threats that keep you up today, and what are you looking at downstream? Because all this infrastructure and investment with the framework is there to protect you against attacks. So what are the types of attacks that worry you?
So my job as the program lead for Pfizer is to protect our manufacturing floor from that interest in playing around in the industrial IT and the industrial manufacturing floor. So I'm going to just say, just like the bear, you know, that catches the slowest runner, Pfizer will not be the slowest runner. So we will have the tools and the technology appropriately deployed that will make it very difficult for you to get into Pfizer.
So to your point, I think years and years ago, primary wake up at night type of mentality was, you know, production systems online and whatnot. And then when you start to learn about what's possible across the wire, and the realization kicks in that, you know, the company that I work for, we have chemical facilities, we have bleaching facilities, we have boilers that are 20 stories tall that can take out small cities. That's what keeps me up at night, is protecting those assets, knowing that at any given time, the wrong bad guy can get in, not just shut down production, but cause harm to humans. right? That's a pretty scary realization. If you need a conversation to take back to your leadership and your investors, that's one that usually gets their attention pretty quick.
What keeps me awake at night is that we are in all of your facilities. So you're worried about your facility being safe, but I have to worry that if we are compromised, you're not safe, none of you are safe. So that's actually why I went to Rockwell Automation, because I felt like this is a really important place to be. And we take that role very seriously, which is why we started on that connected enterprise security strategy years ago. We know we're part of your supply chain. We saw NotPetya. That was propagated when Russia compromised a tax company in the Ukraine. So we know the nation states are using the supply chain as threat vectors to attack their ultimate targets. We know that, and we take that very seriously, and that is definitely what keeps me awake at night. I personally take that role very seriously to protect all of you.
You just set yourself up as a target, you know now. I mean, anything that happens, I saw Chris over here smiling, saying, oh, I know I'm going to blame.
When I first went to Rockwell, there was a discussion about should we acknowledge that we know this? And I would say that's not going to make Russia say, oh, let's go get them. I'm hoping Russia will say, let's go get somebody else who isn't paying attention.
The slowest one, yeah.
Right, right.
So, Stuxnet and Trisis were both attacks on safety systems. That's what would keep me up. Safety system is meant to protect you against potential blowing things up, causing damage, serious damage to plants, and potentially preventing fatalities. And those two occasions, and evidently also the German steel mill attack, were all attacks on safety systems. And the amount of expertise and sophistication required to do those makes you believe that could only come from a well-funded potential nation state. And that would keep me up at night. Should keep everybody up at night. Because evidently the technology is out there and capabilities out there and the motivations out there.
So I'm not going to tell you what keeps me up at night because, you know, we work in kitchen and bath. But I mean, we do generators too. I guess that works. But what I would tell you is it's similar to the bear comment, right? There are many organizations out there, and some of them are very well funded, and it may be my intellectual property or it may be a process. Really what I choose not to stay up late at night, and the reason I do that is because I'm trying to find the places, understanding our risk appetite and the threat vectors that are most proliferated in my organization, and I need to raise that bar. Not so that we're impenetrable, because anybody can get in if they try hard enough. But if I raise that bar high enough, then I become an unattractive target. So, you know, there are serious consequences to certain components of the work you guys are doing. Really think about, you can't be perfect everywhere. You gotta sleep sometime. So where can you raise that bar to make you feel safe that it's gonna take a little longer than your adversary would have liked, or they're going to walk away because it's a business for them too. And if it costs too much, they're going to walk away from that. So that would be my one piece of advice in addition to trying not to stay up at night.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, you know, looking at what your products are, doing that risk assessment, you know, how much revenue is generated, what's the community impact on that, what's the financial risk, what's the environmental concerns. We make some pretty nasty chemicals, right, that can do harm. So, you know, the recognition of we can't do it all, but making an informed decision based upon where we need to focus and make sure that the protection is in place for those most critical areas.
Okay, we are holding up the beer now.
You all done a great job.
Thank you very much. This I thought was absolutely wonderful panel. So, and I didn't even ask many questions, so that was wonderful. Maybe that helped. I'll have to learn that lesson. So, would you join me in thanking our panelists? And thank you so much. Oh, and just one last comment. You know, someone mentioned it here. Maybe it was Mandy. I'm not sure. But tomorrow, Dawn, Mandy, and Tammy are going to be speaking in the case studies part 1 session, 2 o'clock tomorrow. So please come.